I put the lightning over his axe, and this Techmarine is finished. I have just completed this guy, and I am super proud of him. Mine looks better than Games Workshop's. At least I think so. I love the Primaris Techmarine, and I've done some subtle conversion work. I've added extra pouches, especially onto his legs, where he keeps all of his extra supplies and cool rocks that he finds. And of course, I have my customary Black Templar skulls. These skulls, nailed to his power plant, represent the previous owners of this particular suit of Mark X Tacticus armor. And now, with this guy complete and ready to join my army, I'm actually running into a little bit of a problem, because the Ironstorm Spearhead detachment that I'm writing for my Black Templars actually requires 2 Techmarines. The Primaris Techmarine is a monopose kit, and as much as I like the Techmarine, I am not okay with 2 completely identical guys with the same pose, just with a head swap, so I have to make this look completely different to this. Although I really like this. And I want to keep everything the same, I just want to completely change the pose. And I want to see just how hard that's going to be. Having already built one of this guy, I am intimately familiar with this kit. And speaking of this kit, Games Workshop has included an Ultramarines character transfer sheet, which includes Captain, Apothecary, Librarian, Chaplain, and Lieutenant. No Techmarine. Games Workshop, what the heck? This kit does have a few options I didn't use on my first Techmarine. This spooky little robo skull face, pretty cool, but I prefer the Techmarine helmet. And his right hand has 2 options. I used the claw hand that matches the pose on the servo harness, but there's also a grav pistol. This will be one easy way of altering the pose. And also notice, the size and shape of the holster this grav pistol is meant to fit into. It's obviously for a completely different gun, but I get it. We can't have holsters that are the size of the Space Marine's legs. I'm thinking to pull this off, I'm gonna need 1 sacrificial intercessor Space Marine and a whole lot of X-Acto blades. I cut out all the bits I will use and cleaned and prepped them. Pro tip, when there are mold lines in extremely delicate and hard to reach places, you can rub them away with plastic glue. This dissolves the little point without damaging the part. Now I started hacking. I cut my Marine in half at the belt using a razor saw and cleaned it up with my Dremel tool. I have the perfect thing to use my sacrificial intercessor, one of the Warhammer store freebie models in Infernus Marine. This guy is a 2-piece Space Marine that's hollow, which should make cutting into him super easy. Unfortunately though, I'm not gonna be able to use this guy's legs because it turns out Techmarines wear something that's a little bit in between Mark X Tacticus and Gravis armor. Their legs have some lovely little details that I would like to save, so I'm gonna use these legs, but at least I get to use this guy's crotch. I cut apart my Marine, being very careful of his crotch. Absolutely nothing can happen to that crotch. I cut, stabbed, and ground away his torso and legs until all that was left was his Mark X tactical codpiece. Now I've got my legs and my crotch, it was time to reassemble. I used thick super glue as the fit isn't amazing. His left leg is pretty good, but his right one has a huge gap, but I don't think that'll end up being a problem. I did lose his thigh armor though, so I stole a set off of this Assault Marine. Unfortunately, it took 2 sacrificial Space Marines, although these pieces wouldn't have been impossible to kit bash either. Well, that was really hard to do. I'm not sure I got a pose that's very realistic or believable, but I think I can make it work with the base I built for him. Right now, I want to get his legs all bedazzled, and I want to cover up some of the unsightly damage I did trying to kit bash this guy together. To hide the giant hole, I decided this guy will have a cowboy cross-draw holster on his left side. And I filled in the rest of the gap with some decorative jewelry. I don't know what these are, but Space Marines love to wear them, and I put some on his back too. Now for pouches. I don't often put on Space Marine pouches, so I have a ton in my bit bin. I put some on each leg and cut one small one in half to put on his holster. This fella has got pockets on pockets. Now to create the straps. I keep hearing that there's a magical sculpting formula which is equal parts green stuff and milliput. I've never tried this myself, so here goes. I rolled it out flat and cut some small strips that I wrapped around the legs, starting and stopping at the pouches. When working with this mix, it feels a lot more like milliput than green stuff. Now I can glue on some of the finishing touches, getting his backpack into place which connects to his left hand. Now to make a base that makes his awkward legs look like they're actually standing on something. I took some bark and cork and superglued it down onto the base until it was looking like something resembling a cliff. And just because I was feeling a little spooky, a nice little skull. I smoothed out the base with some milliput and used a piece of cork to press in some texture. I put my little fella on his base and carved off the little skull on his head just to make him a tiny bit more different. I cut off the peg so I could glue his axe on in a slightly different position. I kinda wish I could do something about his robo hand, but it would be so hard to get that axe onto a new Space Marine hand. And he's from Mars. Maybe it's just a rite of passage to have one's right hand replaced with metal. I made his bolter follow the angle of his head as if it's motion tracking like the Predator's gun, and then it was time to make the shoulder pads. One little trick I've stumbled into is with the Assault Intercessor sprue. One thing I don't really like about the Assault Intercessors is they wear a unique shoulder pad on their sword arm. And I feel like that's a little superfluous. A Space Marine's a Space Marine's a Space Marine. It doesn't matter if they have a bolter, a plasma gun, or a chainsword, they don't need unique armor to fit their role. However, that unique shoulder pad can very easily be turned into an Omnissiah's cog. Iron Hands players, take note. I took one of these shoulders and my hobby knife and made little perpendicular cuts going halfway in and working my way around the rim. Then I went back and did some parallel cuts to make my gear shapes. It's super easy, and it just makes me want to build more tech boys. I glued these on and now it's time for that servo harness. I cut the connection point off the armor so I could get it reaching up over his body. When he's not immediately fixing a tank, it probably is up and out of the way. And now for his mechadendrite. I was seriously considering a little peekaboo between the legs, but in the end, I just thought over his right shoulder would be stronger. I cut off 2 links but didn't glue it on just yet. This will be a subassembly because it crosses right on top of his Techmarine shoulder pad. I finished off the base with some sand and added my Black Templar skull. Just one for him. This might be a newer suit of armor, probably only a couple hundred years old. I am very pleased with how this guy came out. I definitely think he fits the bill of a Marine who fits the same role and was given the same armor and weapons, but is not literally a mirror of the exact same guy. And it makes me think of my original Techmarine, this cute little guy. This is the Techmarine that comes with the Thunderfire cannon, RIP Thunderfire cannon in 10th edition, and look at this little cutie. You can tell how old he is because he is standing on a 25mm base. It has been a hot minute since Space Marines were on 25mm bases. Actually, with this guy, I now have 3 Techmarines, although I'll probably end up throwing this guy onto an 80mm base with my Thunderfire cannon and running it as a Fire Strike servo turret because they're pretty much the same size and they're the same thing. In fact, the servo turret actually has a Techmarine gunning it. Is that a coincidence from Games Workshop? Probably, but at least it'll give me an opportunity to use my old-ass models in modern 40K. I primed my Techmarine in black and gave him a Zenithal of white. I love Zenithaling big complicated models like this because it really brings them to life. And now for my favorite color, Evil Sun's Scarlet. I have never found a more robust red paint. I mixed it with some black, plenty of water to get it nice and thin, and painted this over his armor. It's about 50% transparent, so I can still see my Zenithal, which I can use to inform me on where I should put my highlights and shadows. I mixed in more black and painted this over any area that is primer black. And for good measure, I also put Nuln Oil over these areas to get them black in the recesses. Then I put pure red over the white areas of the Zenithal. And I don't stop there. I mix some of the red with yellow and a warm white, which gives me an orangey color that I use to highlight my reds and edge highlights. I smoothed the transition with a little more pure red and did a final edge highlight of my very warm white color. I did a little more edge highlighting, not everywhere, just on a few top spots to show the paint is clean and crisp. And you know what else is clean and crisp? That's right, our Patreon. We have monthly terrain packs. This month, it's the Crashed Spaceship, the wrecked bones of an impressive Gothic vessel that your armies can fight over in narrative-driven games. And if you always want to be up to date on the goings-on at Eons of Battle and be entered into our monthly giveaways, this month we're picking 3 followers to receive this month's terrain. Follow the link in the description to sign up to our newsletter. This is how I like to paint when I want to do a really good job. I pick a color and I modify it a little bit with black and white and maybe some similar shades, and I just layer them on. I like layering because I'm not particularly good at blending, so I just lay on more and more and more paint until I have something reasonably smooth. I think my paint jobs look pretty darn good at like 12 inches away, maybe 18. And you'll probably notice that I only painted half of this guy, and that is because I did a split color scheme. I feel like half and half looks really good on Space Marines. It makes them look a little bit more medieval, and that is what I did on my Centurion Warsuits, one of my favorite Space Marine models of all time. That 50-50, especially if one of them is my primary color and another one is a highlight color that I use on some miniatures, but a couple of miniatures spread across my army with that 50-50 looks really, really striking. And it's one more way I think I can make this Techmarine look a little bit different than my second one. I made up my Black Templar contrast paint mixture with Black Templar, Lamian Medium, and Leviathan Blue, and put this over the other half of the model, his in-between parts and his servo harness. This was looking good, but not as good as the red, so I mixed in some gray and white paint and did a few highlights and edge highlights to make the black feel more like the red. Now that my armor is complete, I started knocking out the other parts, painting his pouches with brown, an earth color, a wash of Agrex's Earthshade, and some tan highlights. And on the weapons, I went with my new favorite thing, Rattling Grime. This is the color of gun. I put this over the Zenithal highlight on his gun and axe and did a dry brushing of silver. I know I say this a lot, but Rattling Grime with a little bit of silver dry brushing on top looks so good. Get yourself a pot of Rattling Grime and a little bit of silver dry brushing and any weapon will absolutely sing.
And speaking of things that don't require a lot of effort to look really good, decals.
I put a white cog over his knee, a skull on his thigh armor, and a Templar cross on his forehead. This decal is clear, so it's a little window into the split color scheme on his helmet. Then a Templar cross with some Skitarii numbers on the shoulder. I picked out his eyes with green. My Templar have red lenses, but because his armor is red, I decided to go with green, which I splashed onto his gun as well. As we all know, gravity is the color green. I put purple over the handle of his power axe and then highlighted it with magenta. And then yellow over the bolter, which I washed with Reikland Flesh Shade and did some final highlights of a warm white.
Techmarines are probably one of the most valuable Space Marine things in the entire Adeptus Astartes. In the new codex, they actually got a points decrease for some reason from 70 points to 55 points. And although that decrease was probably not necessary, I really appreciate its lore significance. Techmarines are just normal Space Marines, but they're not just Space Marine mechanics. I mean, they do fix rhinos and pulsars and dreadnoughts, but they actually are sent to Mars to learn the ways of the machine. And when they return, not only are they Matt Damon, but they are fundamentally apart from the normal Space Marines. They might not even view the Emperor as a god or as a father figure to the Space Marines, but they probably see technology as the fundamental force in the universe and the thing that will save mankind. Techmarines are sorcerers who probably don't necessarily understand how technology works, but they understand fundamentally how to fix it and how to fix it almost instantaneously. The Techmarines are an incredibly powerful force to the Space Marines. And of course, they get to carry power weapons. And those power weapons need to be painted.
I base coated the axe with some dark blue paint and added a stripe of electric blue in the middle. I added more white paint to lighten the blue and reinforce this highlight, and then I took this mixture and edge highlighted the blade. Coming back, I did a stipply scratchy look on the brightest spot of the axe. Let me know which axe you prefer, the new one or the old one. I don't know which one I prefer yet. Then I finished off the base the same way I do all my Templar bases, with some earth sprayed on super watery and a dry brushing of tan. I am absolutely in love with these Techmarines. They have so much character to them and just the right amount of decorations. They look completely functional. And functional is the perfect term. Sometimes hero characters are buried under cloaks, necklaces, jewelry, and details, but everything on these guys is utilitarian. And these two suckers have names. Let me introduce you to the newest members of my crusade, Dodgy and JG Boots. These names are Patreon supporters. Our top supporters get their names on Marines and join me in my never-ending crusade against the evil Sean and Nick. 2 Techmarines down and I'm feeling the itch. 2 Techmarines is plenty, but I want more. This monopose kit is pretty workable. The only tricky part was the legs. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Did I manage to get them different enough, or is it still a little uncanny how similar they are?